Perfect competition is rare. As much as we like it as an idea, the conditions for perfect competition are quite tough and not easily met in practice. Perfect lack of competition, meaning collusion between companies, forming cartels to manipulate prices, is also quite rare. Why does this matter? Well, millions of people around the world are complaining about unaffordable prices. Is this a deep failure of the market economy? Can anything be done? Would communism have done better? Yes, this is a picture of Joseph Stalin indeed. Strapping young lad, looked quite promising before becoming a dictator and murdering tens of millions of his own people. Okay, let's go back to the basic economics. To have perfect competition, bringing prices down to the lowest possible level and making consumers happy, we need companies to have no market power. Just take prices as they are in the market, and basically shut up about it. In general, this can happen in two ways. Price competition, also called Bertrand competition after a French mathematician called, surprisingly, Bertrand, and quantity competition among many companies. It also has a French name, Cournot. Cournot sounds similar to Corneille, another Frenchman who was the last guy in England to lose his life in a pistol duel. Somewhere close to Windsor Castle. They say the guy actually gave his gun to his opponent because the opponent's gun was jammed. As a result, Corneille ended up dying by his own gun. That was a funny case of lack of competition. But I digress. Let's think about the most common case, quantity competition. For perfect competition, we need many companies producing very similar goods. That is, people, consumers, need to view them as very similar. Now, this already means we cannot be talking about things like soft drinks. People do not think that Pepsi and Coke are the same, although they are equally bad for your health with all that sugar. Well, the classic versions at least. Obviously, this can't be smartphones. Apple fanboys, for example, tend to be quite peculiar about their gadgets and do not accept other brands as reasonable substitutes. In general, the purpose of all marketing, all these brands pouring gazillions in TV ads and pop-ups in websites and small breaks in your YouTube videos, is actually to make products not look the same to the consumers. In fact, many products are essentially very similar, but producers dress them up to look different. Did you know that Ferrari cars, really cool sort of supercars, often share parts with a really normal car, like a Fiat? They are not the only ones. Many cars in the Stellantis group share parts. The engine of a Jeep is often the same as the engine of an Alfa Romeo. You would think that a sleek urban car needs very different engines from a rugged monster crossing rivers, but that's not necessary at all. Sometimes cars are not just sharing some parts. Did you actually know that the Porsche Macan is really based on the exact same platform as an Audi Q5? The standard models even have the same basic engine. Yes, of course, several parts are different, and the cars are tuned for different types of drivers, but the platform is officially the same, and the cars are both produced by the Volkswagen Group. So, yes, some goods look different to consumers because of clever marketing, even though they might not be that different, and prices for these goods will tend to be higher. So, we are left with relatively few products that are hard to distinguish from each other despite the producer's best efforts. Toilet paper, bananas, no-name TVs or socks, gasoline, canned vegetables. Actually, these products are not that few. They are just kind of boring. But we do consume a lot of boring stuff in our lives. Luxury, interesting products are the exception, although they come much easier to mind. Anyway, the market for boring products will tend to be very competitive. Firms can easily enter, consumers can easily compare, prices move down to the lowest possible, close to the actual cost to make the products, marginal cost to be precise. Forming cartels in such markets is very hard. Even if 10 firms can coordinate their efforts to manipulate prices, if their profits look very high, new firms will always seek to enter with lower prices, lowering profits for all until there is not much profit to be made. Oh, but wait a minute. What about all these markets where producers have market power? Isn't Apple quite rich precisely because it sells its phones at really high prices? Yes, that is true. But you always have a choice to buy other phones at much more reasonable prices. Apple is a luxury good that you choose to buy, despite its high prices. It is even true that for such goods you often pay a much higher price for a small difference in quality. But that is because companies take advantage of your strong personal taste for a specific luxury. Importantly, the existence of such products is not a sign of collusion. Markets with few players and/or substantial differentiation will tend to have prices higher than marginal cost. But the important thing to realize is that this happens because of the nature of these markets. Not because the producers are coordinating, colluding, or generally trying to harm the public. In fact, it is very interesting that in markets with a few producers, say 5, reaching a steady state, or what we call a Nash equilibrium, is quite easy, without any single player knowing much about the other players. Suppose I am a producer of bananas. Think of a process where I observe what one other producer does, say she is producing 100 tons of bananas. I then choose how many bananas to produce and bring to the market, to maximize my profits, given the first company's production. If all producers do that in such a process, they will soon enough reach a state where prices will be stable. They will be somewhat above cost, but much below what they would be if we colluded with each other. Actually, the exact numbers, if you do the math, are simple. Suppose there are N firms with a constant cost of C for every extra ton of bananas they produce. Also, demand for bananas is just a downward sloping line, with people demanding A tons at a price of 0. Then the price in the market will be equal to this expression, which, as you can easily see, becomes smaller the higher the number of firms. For example, if A is 5, then 11 firms are enough for the markup to be 30%. 35 firms would bring it to just 10%. Okay, forget the math. Just trust me. Prices will be somewhat above cost, and will be getting lower the more firms we have in this market. Let me emphasize this. In this case, we have not just the absence of collusion, but even the absence of important information. I, as a producer, hardly know anything about the market. Still, prices will easily reach a steady state, higher than perfect competition, just because of the number of firms producing the good is not infinite. But they will usually not be too high. Okay? Now you deserve a small coffee break. Okay, welcome back. You know what? In theory, even markets with just 2 producers could have really low prices. Remember the French guy, Bertrand, the one with price competition? Think of 2 guys, Bob and Mary, having ice cream stands at a beach, very close to each other, selling identical ice cream. Say, cornetto cones. Suppose they get the ice cream delivered at the beach for $1 per cone. Now, all they can do is post a sign with a price, and the people will choose where to buy. Can it be that they have different prices? Of course not. If Bob is more expensive, everyone will buy from Mary. Suppose that Mary is cheaper than Bob, selling the ice cream for $2. What will Bob do? He will sell the ice cream for less, say $1.8, and corner the market, right? But now Mary is unhappy. She will sell the ice cream for even less. $1.5. Obviously, this will go on and on until they have the same prices, very close to the cost of the ice cream. This is interesting for two reasons. First, just two firms are enough to have super strong competition. Second, super strong competition will make firms have the same prices. To an outside observer, the firms look the same. You would think they are coordinating. But it is the exact opposite. They are competing so fiercely that their prices reach rock bottom. In this beach example, it is very easy to see why cartels are hard to form and maintain. Even if Bob made a deal with Mary to have high prices, they would both be very tempted to break it. If you just lower prices a bit, you get the whole market. Even if the two became a couple, one of the few couples that manages not to have fights and general discord, what then? Well, a new competitor, Nick, would gladly set up shop and lower prices just a bit. And a new price war would start. Only a true, Robert De Niro in the 90s style mafia boss, would be able to stop this process from happening. As a last note, even a company alone in a market, meaning a monopoly, might be keeping prices relatively low. If the market is contestable, meaning firms can easily enter and exit, the monopolist would keep prices low to avoid having too high profits. Because what would happen then? Of course, the high profits would make a noise and start attracting attention. As you should know, you should never attract attention when things are going well for you. If you were to show high profits to the world, competitors would start entering the market to share some of these profits, and then you would be worse off in the end. Okay, now it is time to summarize the theory. The details of every specific market matter, but prices will in general tend to be lower, the more identical the goods are, and the higher the number of competitors. Of course, information will also matter. Now, why don't we take the theory to the real world, right? Well, in the real world, we are forgetting one major player, the state. You see, competition is often hindered by the state. According to The Economist, Britain, like other advanced economies, has seen competition weaken for 25 years. Markups, meaning the difference between prices and actual costs, have risen. At the same time, the rate at which young firms displace old ones is falling. Several markets seem to be malfunctioning. Consumers pay more than they should for baby formula, vets, funerals, and much else. One example are slots at Heathrow Airport. The slots regime is a mid-century relic. In Britain, as around the world, rights are grandfathered. As long as an airline uses a slot 80% of the time, it can hold onto it in perpetuity for free. That was fine in the 1960s when runway space was abundant. Now that such space is heavily congested, it produces a clogged-up market. At Heathrow, 99% of slots are grandfathered. Spare ones come up for sale rarely, and at a stonking price. Challengers are locked out or stay small. Inefficiency is rewarded. It is better for an airline to send up small or empty planes than forfeit a slot to a rival. And what is the solutions of The Economist? I still mean the magazine. The Economist's answer is to auction slots, much like radio spectrum. A market-based system would mean new airlines could bid against incumbents. Small airlines could grow into serious rivals. Customers would enjoy lower prices and better service. Airlines that bore the true value of slots would use them more efficiently, sending bigger planes to more popular destinations. The proceeds could fund new airport infrastructure. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, the problem is not confined to airports or to Britain. States intervene in markets whether they like it or not. In advanced economies, most things you can produce or sell involve some sort of license. Restrictions in the number of licenses, or any cost imposed to get a license and so on, are barriers that lower competition. Sometimes the state intervention is not that obvious. Think of the typical U.S. suburb, but this discussion also applies to many nice neighborhoods in big European cities. How many supermarkets or pizzerias do you see in the middle of the suburb? Zero, of course, because of zoning laws. Still, people living in the suburb want to eat, and drink, and do things in general, close to them, if possible. Suppose you have the only restaurant that is allowed to operate close enough to the suburb. You know, this nice and cozy Italian joint right when you leave the highway, just before you enter the suburb. Do you think you will set prices as low as in a densely populated city center, where you would be competing with 20 Italian restaurants, and 20 Asian ones, and a couple of really cheap burger bars? That's right, I didn't think so. You will have high prices to match the amazing quality food you are serving. Well, the only quality that people can find in any restaurant around them. To close, I do have to come back to the original question. Given that we have imperfect competition, how are markets doing in general? Would a planned economy do better? Well, again, details matter, but it is relatively easy to look at general data. One thing we can look at is company profits, or better profit margins. In most goods, except for luxury items, net margins are quite low. This implies that prices are quite close to the cost of the goods for the producers or vendors. Let's have a look at a very nice data set put together by a professor at New York University's Stern School of Business. Supermarkets in the U.S. have margins of just 1.97%. Think about it. If you live in the States, most of your groceries come from companies that have less than 2% margin. If they eliminated their profits completely, you would hardly see a change in prices. That is true in general. According to Deloitte, the top 250 companies in retail globally had an average net profit margin of just 4.3%. Let's go back to the U.S. data. Telecom services are slightly higher, at 5.87%. Few companies have much higher margins, usually in high-risk or high-addiction sectors. For example, some of the highest margins are found in financial services, not surprisingly, at 22.3%, unless there is a financial crisis, of course, and in software, especially entertainment software, at 27.4%. All these video games are being made for a reason. And the highest margins are to be found in the most addictive good, tobacco, at a whopping 31.2%. Another thing we can do, let's look at overall prices, although in reality, the overall price level is strongly influenced by monetary conditions. Still, for a long time before the pandemic, prices were quite stable in practically all advanced economies. And quality was rising for many of these goods. For example, the gadget you are using to watch this video is most probably much better than the one you had 5 years ago. Faster, prettier, lighter. But your older, worse gadgets were much more expensive to buy. The one mistake you should not make is think that all this innovation and relentless progress is automatic. Just has to happen. Planned economies did not see such progress. In fact, people in East Germany had to wait for decades, literally, to get delivery of this car. And it was not cheap by any means either. On 1989, the cheapest version cost 12,000 marks, which was about 1 year's wages for an East German worker. The equivalent would be having to shell out $60,000 for a car the size of a Mitsubishi Mirage, Chevrolet Spark, or a Fiat 500. But much less appealing than all those, of course. Guess what happened the moment the wall came down and East Germany joined the West? That's right. These cars were so badly made, they immediately became so useless in comparison with West German cars that they ended up as pig fodder.
And now it's time to say goodbye to the Trabant and be thankful that we don't live in communism.
So, to summarize, markets might not always be perfectly competitive, but they do tend to provide us with products that people actually want, at mostly reasonable prices for reasonable quality. Are consumers happy being reasonable? Or do they sometimes get stuck in an endless quest for the next thing to consume? Something slightly better and ever more expensive.
Don't buy anything, don't get anything, nothing big. Did you hear what I said? What's the matter with you?
Well, that is a question for a different video. But I still think we are better off than this.